is Suma Rauji of Cakes and More, and this is the video series Baking for Beginners. When I started baking, and for quite some time after I started baking, it was fairly peaceful till yeast came on the scene and I started trying out yeast breads. And then trouble began because I was failing miserably in every attempt of mine when I tried to bake breads. And then finally I realized that yeast was the culprit, and it was the bad quality yeast I was using which was causing most of the trouble. So it's really important that you use good quality yeast and store it properly as well. So finding good yeast is half the battle won. Here in India broadly we get three types of yeast, and one is this called as instant yeast, and then we have the local active dried yeast, and then we have this thing called as fresh yeast, which is mostly used by a lot of our local bakeries. So coming to the active dried yeast, you would find here in most doughs. This is what you would normally come across, and the granules of this yeast are fairly large. This is also active dried yeast which a friend got for me. So you could use active dried yeast, but be sure that it's of good quality and something that works. And when you use active dried yeast, it always needs to be proofed, which means that you will need to make sure that the yeast is alive when you start using it. So this process is called as proofing. We'll come back to that later. And then we have this really wonderful thing called as instant dried yeast, and the granules of this yeast are really tiny and very small, and this kind of yeast is very easy to use, and it's fairly reliable also, and you could also easily store it for quite some time. If you do not open the pack, and then you could leave it at room temperature for a few months and it will work just fine. Only when you open the pack, that is when you need to transfer it to a plastic container, a good dry clean plastic container with a good lid, fitting lid, and then put it in the freezer. And if you have purchased a packet like this, then it's going to be lasting you for a very long time, and you do not want to keep using from the same thing. So you transfer the entire contents to one large box, and just take out maybe a little bit, maybe half of this, and then keep it in the freezer. Both the boxes need to remain in the freezer. You could keep using the yeast from the smaller box and keep taking more yeast from the bigger box as and when you need it. Always remember to use clean and dry spoons when you are measuring yeast out of the container. One really good thing about instant yeast is that you don't really need to proof it. You could just add it with the rest of the dough ingredients like the flour, water, milk or whatever, and then directly use it, and it works absolutely fine. So it's a pleasure to use instant dried yeast. And normally when you are using active dried yeast, you would need to put this in some bit of warm water and some sugar in order to activate the yeast. But in the case of instant yeast, this works even with water which is at room temperature, and even cold water, which is a really good thing, because when you are using active dried yeast, the one big danger is that you could kill the yeast if you use water which is very hot. Instant yeast stores well in the freezer for quite a few months and probably longer than that, but since we have power cuts so frequently, it may not really last so long. But certainly for a few months it lasts really well. So instant yeast is a lot more easier to use and quite reliable also. So this is the best thing a beginner could use. This is fresh yeast. I managed to get this from a bakery nearby. This is also called as compressed yeast or cake yeast, and this is also supposed to be something really good, though I haven't tried it yet. But then since I do have this block of yeast now, I think I'm going to be trying this really soon. Always stick to the amount of yeast that has been given in the recipe. Do not add more, because your bread might then start smelling funny. If you're going to be using active dried yeast, or even to test if instant yeast is still active and it is still working good, you will need to proof the yeast or check the effectiveness of yeast. Here is what we need to do. We need to take some sugar in a small bowl, and I'm going to be adding some yeast. The temperature of the water or any other liquid you would be using in the recipe is really important, because if the water or the milk is hot, then you might then kill the yeast. So it's best to use an instant read thermometer to check the temperature of the water, just to be sure that you're not going to be killing the yeast. So now I'm going to be adding this water to this yeast and the sugar here. Just let it sit for some time now. So after about 8 to 10 minutes, this bowl needs to be totally frothy on the surface, and that will tell you that this yeast is active and you could use it in your breads. In case there are no bubbles in the bowl and there is no froth, so it means that the yeast is not good enough. You need to discard it and get some better yeast. And fresh yeast, though good, it's supposed to have a very short shelf life. You could keep it in the refrigerator for a few days and then you may not be able to use it. So it may not be very convenient for home bakers to be using this, and that is when you find the instant yeast being more convenient to use. So remember, active dried yeast always needs to be proofed every time you use it, but it's not the same with instant dried yeast. You could just use it directly, but then again it doesn't hurt to proof instant yeast, so you could go ahead and do that too. I hope you found this video useful. So please do get yourself some good yeast and we shall bake some really easy and quick pizza soon.